In today's video, we're going to use a wood lathe to turn this ordinary screwdriver into something spectacular. I appreciate you joining me in my shop today for our continuing series on easy wood turning projects. I hope this project is one that will give you some ideas for some things to do on your wood lathe. Today's project will be turning a fancy handle for a 4-in-1 screwdriver set like this. Now you can pick up something like this for $3 to $5. I happen to have a coupon at Harbor Freight for one of these and I got it free with a purchase. So it should be a fun project that anyone would be proud to have when we're done. I'm Jason Geiser and this is Geiserwoodturner. Let's turn a handle for our 4-in-1 screwdriver.
The first thing we want to do is pull the handle out of the plastic, and this little metal receiver in the end is what we want, and that's the hardest part to remove. So we'll pull out the old Coleman stove and boil some water, then drop that handle in there for about 7 minutes until it's al dente. Now really this is just to soften up the plastic so we can get that receiver out of the end. So we'll put it in the vise and rock that back and forth. Sometimes you can get that little receiver out just like that, but this one broke, but the plastic's still soft, so I could get in there with some wire cutters and just kind of cut that plastic away. This is really the hardest part of the whole project, is getting that metal receiver that we need. Now you can remove this receiver with a Dremel or a saw, but this worked pretty well for me. Okay, now that we have that pesky receiver out of there, we need to measure it and determine what size of hole we need to put into our wood blank. And we're going to use two different sizes, one for the receiver and one to house the screwdriver. And then we're going to make a ferrule for the outside on the end, and just using a piece of 3/4 inch coupler from a copper pipe. Hey, now that we have all the prep work done, we can actually start working with our wood blank. Now this is a piece of spalted tamarind, and I bought this piece because I think the wood is really beautiful. But the fun part about wood turning is you can find just beautiful pieces of hardwood anywhere, and the surprise inside is the part that I really enjoy. Basically I'm just going to rough this piece and get it ready to be received into a chuck so that I can drill on the end. And I've covered that in a lot of other videos, so I'm not going to cover it a lot here. Now we'll just pop that tenon into a chuck loosely, bring the tailstock up. I never get this perfectly centered the second time for some reason. So what I'm going to do is waste away the end of this and get rid of that center mark one more time so I can make a little divot to perfectly center my drill bit. It just helps a little bit. So we'll raise up the tool rest and then use the point of a skew chisel to just make a little divot. I determined the size of my receiver to be about 5/8 of an inch. So I'm using a 5/8 inch Forstner bit, and we're going to go in about 1 inch just for the receiver, and then we're going to step it down to a smaller size. Now when you're stepping it down to a smaller size, it's always a good idea to drill the larger hole first and then do the smaller. Now we're putting a mark on here at 1 inch so that we know where to stop. About right there. You always want to back it out every once in a while to clear away chips. Okay, and so here is our 7/16 drill bit. We're just using a twist drill bit, and this is going to drill a hole so that our screwdriver has room to fit inside the handle so you can flip it around. As far as how deep to drill it, you just want to measure and make sure that you have at least 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch on the bottom of extra, just so you don't run into the bottom and you don't have any problems there. Okay, we'll just blow the shavings out of the hole and do a test fit, and that seems to work really well. So now we can move on and put on our copper ferrule on the end. And so we're just going to make a mark to know how far to go. It doesn't really matter how far at this point. The more important thing is getting the diameter right when you use your parting tool to cut it down. So We're going to measure that and give it a little bit extra space so that I can use my calipers to determine the diameter here. So I'll come in with the parting tool and we'll take off a little bit at a time. We'll start on the end and just determine that size. And as soon as those calipers start to slip over, then I'll know I'm close to my depth. I can take the rest of it down, and then we'll just remove the tailstock and kind of work our way until that piece will fit over the end. And you don't want it to be too tight, but you don't want it to be too loose either. It's better to be tight than loose, although we are going to glue this piece onto the screwdriver. It's time to glue our pieces on the end, and I don't want to remove the blank from the chuck because I have problems getting it centered, so I'll just remove the whole chuck and we'll put it back on when we're done. Whenever I'm gluing metal to wood, I like to rough up the contact surfaces so that we get a little bit of a mechanical adhesion with the glue. Okay, and on this project we're going to use some 5-minute epoxy. So we'll put out some resin and the hardener. The important thing is to try and get the same amount. This is a 1-to-1 ratio. And then we'll mix it up and mix it as good as we can with a stick. And then I'll paddle some of it around the outside for that ferrule. And we'll slide that ferrule on, make sure it's all the way down, and then we can wipe off the excess with the paper towel. And now for that receiver, I'm just going to try and eliminate as much mess as I can by putting it on the inside and then sliding that down. I'll slide it down into place, and then we'll remove our screwdriver piece, and then I'm just going to kind of fill the edges of the holes here because that was a hexagon shape, not completely round on this one. Okay, we'll wipe off that screwdriver part, and then we'll also wipe off any of the excess and make sure we don't get any down in that hole. Okay, after about 20 minutes of letting that dry, we can put it back on the lathe and bring our center point right up into that receiver. And the cool thing about a wood lathe is you can cut some softer metals like aluminum and copper on the lathe. I'm using a carbide tool, and I'm going to trim the end of this ferrule so it'll match the wood, and I can kind of round it a little bit as well. Make it look really nice. And one last thing I'd like to do to the copper ferrule is hit it with some sandpaper, and it'll remove any of the excess glue on the outside as well as give it a nice brushed copper look. Now we can start working on the shape of our handle, and I'm going to use a spindle gouge here, and I like to get an idea of a shape in my mind and then just go for it. And you can make it as simple or as complex as you like. It's important while turning to remember your fundamentals. Ride the bevel, always turn from high to low, and just have fun doing it. Try not to get catches unless you're fishing, which we're not doing here. So I decided what I wanted to do is make a large rounded bead towards the front and a cove in the middle, and then it's going to be a little thicker on the bottom side, and we're going to make another large rounded bead. And on both sides of the flat spots on the bead, I'm going to make a little groove just to try and make it a little more interesting, even though this piece of wood is already interesting enough. Would have been great as a plain handle. With a scraper, I'm just going to smooth everything up. Then I'll try and get all those details nice and crisp with my skew chisel. And I think it just makes it look a little bit more professional when everything's nice and crisp. And we'll just put those grooves in one by one. And we're ready to do a little bit of sanding. Just work your way through the grits. And try not to sand out all the details that you've made in your piece. Now we'll slow down the lathe so I don't get a stripe of lacquer being thrown off from the piece onto my face shield, and we'll just throw some brushing lacquer on there with a paper towel, and I don't worry about getting it on the copper. It works just fine. And that really brings out the color in this piece of wood. Love it. The last bit of turning that we'll need to do is get rid of that waste wood on the end of the handle. And so what we're going to do is we're going to reverse chuck this piece, and I'll just pop that copper into the inside of my chuck there and center it up, and then I'll tighten it down. And it's going to make a few marks in the copper, but that's okay. There are going to be some evenly spaced lines. That looks pretty cool. So we'll turn on the lathe, speed it up, and then we'll just turn away all this waste wood that we're not going to use, and get that handle down to where it's pretty round on the end, and just take a little bit of wood at a time and just keep going until that little nub falls away. And then we can adjust our tool rest and come in and carefully take that away and get it nice and round. And then we'll go through just like we did before, and we'll sand it. We'll go through the grits. I think I started with 120, went to 220, and then a 320 after that. Okay, and then we can again put some brushing lacquer on, and I'm using this brushing lacquer this time as a sealer. When we're all done, I'm going to take it over and do a spray lacquer finish, and it's the same brand and they work really well together. I wrapped a bit of blue tape around the screwdriver shaft, and that allows me to keep it clean as well as give me something to grab onto to rotate while I'm spraying. Made it really nice.
Hey, that's so great. I'm really happy with the way this project turned out. It just goes to show you can take something inexpensive like a screwdriver and put some heart into it and make something that's really fantastic. I really appreciate all the wonderful comments I've been getting, and the real reason I do this is for you. I hope that these videos will inspire you in such a way that you'll want to get out and make and create some things with your own hands. If you'd like to follow along with some more easy wood turning projects, stay tuned. I've got some more on the way. If you haven't already, I'd like to ask you to subscribe. And if you don't want to miss a single upload, click on that notification bell. I wish you well, and we'll see you soon.